Okay. Thank you, Rabbi. Good evening. The rise of anti-Semitism seems to me to be reminiscent of what was happening in the 1930s. It's scary. Jews are 2.4% of the population and are recipients of 55% of the hate crimes in the U.S. The Wall Street Journal reports that nearly 50% of U.S. Jewish students are hiding their Jewish identity. In many cases, university administrators have generally failed to protect students from attacks against them. There is a movement now to enforce Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It prohibits discrimination based on ethnic identity. Jews are not just a religious group. They are rather a people who share a culture, history, language, and territory. School administrators will be monitored in how they enforce the law. Both funding to universities and prosecution will be considered for those that don't comply. I do think there is a bigger picture here that we need to focus on. We can put the word anti in front of almost every ethnic group. Anti-Asian, anti-Black, anti-Native American, anti-Latino, anti-gay, anti. And we have an African-American granddaughter who fits in two of these categories, and we're concerned about her future. It is my opinion that we are dealing with systemic toxicity in our national DNA. There seems to be critical elements of life that are missing, like kindness, acceptance, tolerance, compassion, love. What we should be focusing on is raising our collective consciousness. I believe that deep down, we have more things in common than the national narrative that we are a polarized nation. So how do we change the narrative? We need to build relationships outside of our Jewish community, exchange meaningful dialogues with people whom we might not agree with. I think the secret is to focus on questions rather than the answers to promote quality dialogue. It's really common for human beings to not actively listen. Oftentimes we're thinking about the next thing that we want to say rather than hearing what the other person wants to express. So we need to start practicing reflective listening. We need to blur the lines between us and them philosophy. We need to teach our children at a very young age to practice loving kindness. I'm a believer that apathy is just as harmful as overt hatred. I also believe that one person can make a significant difference in the world, and I'd like to share with you something that I experienced that was a very important event in my life. About 5 years ago, my husband and I booked a river cruise on the Danube, mainly because it stopped in Linz, Austria. I knew Linz was very close to Mauthausen and Steyr, the DP camp where I was born. Several months before the cruise, we had happened to be visiting the U.S. Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., and we had not been there for about 30 years, at which time I had tried to find out if there was anything left of the camp that I was born in. But there wasn't any information available. So this time, we came, and one of the curators asked us to wait while she researched if there was any information to share. A half an hour later, she walked out with a folder, and in that folder was the identification papers of my mother, my father, and myself. It was quite an emotional moment. Also in the folder was the contact. His name was Karl Remsmeyer. He's a religion teacher, a Christian, and he founded Steyr's Holocaust Memorial Committee. I emailed Karl when we returned home. He wrote back that the Holocaust was never taught in the schools in Austria. Even though Hitler went to school a couple of years in Steyr, and he made some famous speeches in Linz. Carl decided to make his life's work to raise the collective consciousness and accountability of his countrymen. He wrote a book, he organized summer camp programs to educate youth, he built a museum, and he refurbished the Steyr Jewish Cemetery. He planned each year's commemoration of the liberation of Mauthausen concentration camp. In one of his emails, Carl asked me to send him a copy of my birth certificate, and he would explain why when we met. He also asked when I would be docking in Linz, and he wrote back that that cruise ship on the Danube goes back and forth 52 weeks a year, all year long, and Linz is the third stop in the itinerary. You could have picked any week to be here, but you are coming to your birthplace on the exact date of the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Mauthausen and Steyr. So we took a cab to Mauthausen, and we couldn't believe our eyes. There were thousands of people from all over the world, delegations from almost every continent, Austrian boy and Girl Scout troops carrying flags, and buses full of students from all over Austria. Yeah, these are some pictures that we took. After the ceremonies, Carl said, my wife and I are going to drive you to Steyr, which was 15 minutes away. I was thinking it was just going to be another industrial town. When we got there, Carl said, there are only 3 remaining structures on the campsite. One is a former barracks, which is now a learning center for the handicapped. Another is the hospital, which is now a daycare center for locals. And then he said, the reason I asked you for your birth certificate is that Austrian birth certificates have the address of where your family lived when you were born. There is only one building left of the camp residence, and it's 6 Rooseveltstrasse, your home. I think we all cried. I don't think too many people on this earth could have experienced the serendipity of that moment. This is a photo of my mom and I in the grass behind the unit. It still looks like that. Carl asked me to send pictures of my family to put in his museum. My parents' wedding, my 2nd birthday. Carl still continues his life's work. A new monument has been erected in the Steyr Cemetery, dedicated to 800 concentration camp victims that were buried together in a tomb. Over the time, the grave site was covered by a footpath. Carl was not going to let the fate of the slain prisoners sink into oblivion. I look back today at the coincidences of me asking for new information in Washington, D.C. about Steyr, then unbelievably being present for the 75th anniversary of the liberation, and then seeing my first home in the displaced persons camp still standing as housing for the handicapped, with even a green plant in the window. I was given the gift of a lifetime and the honor of meeting a truly righteous human. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. And now we'll hear from Sophie Duckett.
Hello. This is my mom, Fanny Grizzle, and I'm Sophie Duckett.